David, it's lovely to be in your garden.
Well, it's lovely to have you here.
And in case people don't recognise you instantly, but I'm sure they would, I think of you as Bonking Bernard from Four Weddings and a Funeral.
I know, well, it's a memory. No, it was a while ago, but yes, lots of people do remember that film, and it was such a seismic film for British film, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it had such an impact, and none of us expected it to have
How
that.
long ago did you film it?
I think it was 94.
Wow, so
95,
that is 30
so that's
years
14,
ago.
24, 30 years ago, yeah.
And as you say, it absolutely took the country by storm. I mean,
Yeah.
it had a stellar cast.
Yeah, a great cast, but many of whom people were unaware of before that film.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they've been working. I mean, I
Yes.
think most of us have been working away, but not with that sort of prominence, no.
It's funny because I went to a wedding recently, a few months ago, and it was quite similar because the vicar was part-time amateur, made similar cock-ups as Rowan Atkinson did.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was in a sort of faded country house, and they'd all had to go and weed it. It was you know, open for weddings and things, and they hadn't weeded or anything. So everyone had had and weeded and got it ready, and it was all quite shambolic, but it was lovely. It had that sort of English atmosphere when it's very relaxed but fun and gregarious. But no, we will all remember you for that, I'm sure. But you've got to, obviously, you find gardening a fabulous foil
I love it.
for your acting.
I do, and the other thing, when I knew you were coming today, the other thing that struck me was that everybody defines it as a solace and a form of therapy, gardening. But what I find also is that it's an extension of one's confidence, an extension of one's personality, so that the garden almost is an extension of yourself, in the sense that I remember. We were talking about it earlier. Our fourth child was stillborn, and that was the one period in our life as a couple where we were under a certain amount of strain, and the garden dwindled with our contentment at that time. And then when we recovered, the garden appeared to be cherished and nurtured again. And so I often think about that actually it has a sort of umbilical link to people.
It is their lifeline, and you put into it. And I sometimes feel that when you've been working at your garden, which you have been in this garden for 30...
Yeah, this camellia here, Adolf Orderson, which is that lovely rich red one, I don't have to tell you, but that early red one was planted in September 1987. And a month before the not hurricane that Michael Fish announced was not a hurricane, but that horrendous wind that took down so many trees in Kent and you know, and London. And so that was planted a month before that, along with a couple of other there's an azalea over there, Orange Beauty, that was also planted that month. And you can see the remains along these flower beds of the peat blocks, which of course I would never put in now, but at the time was less frowned upon.
Yes.
The beds of peat blocks there in that same month in 1987. And I remember the person who delivered those blocks said, "I've got to get home, apparently it's going to blow tonight."
So you really remember that time very well.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting because there's a wall around the edge, isn't there?
Yeah.
And then you've got the privet hedge, which was here when you came, on top.
Yeah.
And then you've made this bank from the peat blocks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I find interesting is just over there we've got this very busy road, but it absolutely isolates you from it.
It
doesn't
does. It does.
Because you've got that depth of foliage, 3-4 meters. So this was the first bit you really tackled.
It was the first bit, and my love of rhododendrons and ericaceous plants generally was born of my obsession with playing golf at the time. And so I watched the US Masters, and of course that course is surrounded by the vibrancy of azaleas camellias and
See?
rhododendrons.
Oh my God.
And so I thought, I've got to be able to replicate that on a tiny scale. To create an entrance to this area, and so the retailer who I bought it from told me about this new rhododendron hedge, which I thought was fascinating, and it is now, after 3 or 4 years, flowering really nicely. You can apparently cut it back hard, and that it will solidify and really build up as a compact hedge.
I was fascinated. I haven't seen it before, but it says on the label it's bloom buxus. Sorry, bloom bucks. And it says, a substitute for box.
Yeah.
And so presumably you could have kept it much slower if you had wanted to.
Yeah.
But so
I would quite like it, I don't know if it's possible, quite like it to grow to about that height. So it becomes an extension of the yew round there. And you really do feel you're walking between two.
Yeah, I would trim the top a bit to get, you know, it
to
is
start that.
counterintuitive, and that would just
Yeah.
shoot up a bit.
Yeah.
And it should do that, I think. But it's interesting because I wouldn't have thought that your soil was that acidic. You might be 7.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
neutral.
And so
If
it's
not,
still surviving quite well, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I often think that these prefer much lower pHs, but it's interesting that it looks this healthy. And it
Yeah.
does look healthy, doesn't it, on a pH 7. So you have gone big on your tropicals here. I like
Well-
the way that you've been very disciplined, like your playwriting. You've got your azaleas, your
Yeah.
bosky, then you're all tropical here.
This is my new love. I mean, this ricinus here, is that how you pronounce it? Or ricinus? I don't
Ricinus. It's
know.
Latin, they're all dead, they
Yeah,
don't know.
no.
Yes.
But the one we had last year grew very, very tall. But I was working away this summer and wasn't able to water and feed it in the way I did last year because it became an extraordinary and huge plant that I absolutely loved.
They are dramatic, aren't
Yeah,
they?
they're very
so
dramatic.
Yeah.
I mean, this is. But
Yeah, so
obviously, with all
poisonous.
the ricin content, you have to be careful.
With your
And I've got 3
grandchildren.
grandchildren, so
Yeah.
I steer them away from that
Yeah.
plant.
And then you've got this, which you're really on trend, aren't you? Convertiflora.
Yeah,
Salvia convertiflora.
I love it.
Wonderful
I
plant.
love this sort of
Burnt orange.
Yeah, burnt orange stems here, and these lovely
Felty.
thick, felty leaves.
And you all this watering, they're all in pots, so you must have.
Well,
so when you're
that
away,
was to do with my 3 months away. When I got back,
yeah.
the pots were not in the flower beds, and things had sort of that I might have been more attentive to if I'd been in the country. So what I did was move a whole lot of pots in to try and create a full feel as
It
the
is
year
very
went
useful
on.
doing that. Isn't
Yeah,
it, just
it
to
is,
move them
when
around
other
to give you
things
that
have-
mobility.
Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. But it's a nice little space. I like the fact that you've got these little areas.
Different
another one
areas.
there, another one here, and
Yeah.
your greenhouse. So all this tenderness all goes in that little.
Or-
that must be
Yeah.
absolutely buttered to bollock come
It-
December, isn't it? in
It
there?
really is.
Yes,
It's one of
yeah.
my great loves is these Enseti bananas,
That
present
is
obsession.
a tender one. Isn't
Yes,
it? Very tender.
it is very tender. But last year I tried to overwinter it just by wrapping it. I had a sort of corrugated plastic surround, then straw in that, and fleece. I did the whole thing,
Yeah.
and it copped it. It died. It obviously went below the required time. This year I'm going to dig them up from the bottom and then just put them in a black plastic pot with a little bit of compost in the bottom of the pot and put it in a shed that's just going to stay above freezing and see if that will
Yeah,
work
I
any
didn't.
better.
I did have one once, and I moved it into my greenhouse, which is not really very much heated at all, and it didn't survive. But last year was incredibly mild. You know,
Yeah,
if you'd ever done it, it would have been last year.
Yeah.
But I do wonder. I think it probably needs something. Normally, you see them overwintering in leaf. You know, so
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
hardy banana. you can get away with
Yeah,
what you do
absolutely.
very easily, and I do,
Yeah.
even in the East Midlands.
Yeah.
But with that, I just wonder, what temperature do you keep your greenhouse at?
10.
Oh, right. So you should be okay.
Yeah,
You might
it's
be
more.
okay.
Well, I've
It's
got
sticking
one
it
in there.
up,
I've
isn't it?
just what I've been doing is investing in one each year as the next year's outdoor.
Oh, I see. Oh,
I'm
you
treating it like
are.
I mean, it's very indulgent because they're not the cheapest plant in the world. But there's my one that I've just bought, which will be next year's.
Oh, I see.
So treating them like an exotic annual, really.
Oh, wow, that is clever. You are quite
So yeah,
disciplined,
obsessed.
obsessed.
All that.
Lovely range of a beautiful Tibucina.
Yeah, that's nice up there.
So the Tibucina with the purple flowers, I've never seen them hanging down like that. So it's reached the top and then it's going elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, I've according to instructions, pruned it right back, and this is the first time I left it to see how it would flower, having left it over winter, in the spring, and it's developed this really nice hanging habit. So I think I might do the same again next
It's like
year.
a sort of candelabra.
Yeah.
Isn't it? With some light purple
Yeah.
lights.
I mean,
on it.
this is 40 years old, or 35
You,
years
you
old.
wouldn't feel tempted to get a bigger one.
Yes, I would.
And really,
I
lovely for the
definitely,
next big
yes,
birthday,
yes.
which is coming up.
But
yeah.
I suppose I could just come down here, couldn't I? Except the poor old tree peony would suffer. But
You could, yes, you could fit one in there, couldn't you?
just sort of go backwards in there somehow.
And then you could work in there. Would you come out and work in the greenhouse?
Well, I do. I
and
do sit in this
Oh, you do
tiny
sit and write,
space.
so God, things
Yeah.
like...
Oh, yeah. I spend those cushions are not coincidental.
I see.
I spend
see.
a lot of time just staring at whatever there is to stare in there.
And writing.
And writing and learning lines. That's a good learning lines place.
And are you quick at learning lines?
Not anymore.
Oh, right. Is
I
it
used
something
to
you
be.
lose? I thought it
Oh,
would
you
be something
definitely.
you quite... Oh, right,
Some
gosh.
exceptions. Some exceptions to the rule.
And your play, Pressure,
Yeah.
all about the meteorologist, Jack Stagg?
James Stagg.
James
yeah,
Stagg.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you obviously are keen on climate and weather,
Yeah.
because being a gardener, we all are.
Yeah.
But did that elevate that? Did you understand more about the weather?
I did a
and
lot
things?
of research into the weather and how wind is created, how it evolves, and it was absolutely fascinating. But like a lot of concentrated research for writing, I've already forgotten most of it because you move on to something else.
I'm glad
So
you
for
find that too.
Do you? Yeah. So for a brief time, I really did know quite a lot about the weather.
Yeah.
But now, not much more than anybody else.
But the basic thing was that he understood the Gulf Stream.
The jet stream.
The jet stream,
he
sorry.
understood the pattern of storms crossing the Atlantic
Yeah.
west to east, and so he recognised the danger of these storms coming in those conditions, which Eisenhower's other meteorologists, the American meteorologists, thought, based on historical occurrence, thought that it was going to be a beautiful day.
For D-Day.
For D-Day on June the 5th. And he knew that there was going to be an appalling storm that could kill 80 to 100,000 people if they went. And he persuaded Eisenhower to postpone. And it's an extraordinary story.
Yeah.
And
Really
it's very exciting.
And you're amazing. This is your big entertaining social area, is it? Where you spend most of your time, would you say?
Well, I come down here a lot because it's very enclosed.
Yeah.
And we get the sun comes over the roof quite early, and it's a real sun trap here. And here are all the old-fashioned roses, which, funnily enough, Julia and I first, even before the obsession with rhododendrons, Julia's sister sent us a package from Peter Beals of 5 old roses. One of which is still my favourite smell of any rose, which is Isaac Pereire. I absolutely love it. We've got 2 Gertrude Jekyll's, which is
Madame
about as
Isette
near as go.
Perret.
Yes.
Is it?
Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. No, I think that's
it's
right.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is legendary to be one of the most highly scented ones, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Gertrude Jekyll, you meant?
Well, we've got Gertrude Jekyll, which is
Yeah.
pretty close,
Yeah.
the smell,
Yeah.
because I always found the other one was so difficult to grow. It would catch all sorts of, I don't know, mildew and all sorts. But anyway, we had that, and Prosperity, which we've now moved over to here, which we've got as well, and a couple of
Echiums.
others. Oh yes, we've got Echiums here.
So your Echiums survived the winter. Did they survive last winter?
These ones were fleeced last winter
Oh,
and
you
very
fleeced them?
small.
Oh right, yeah.
And I don't know what am I going to do this winter if it gets nasty. You just hope.
Is it? I have had Echiums through the winter in the East Midlands.
Yeah.
But it depends, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we've already had a frost. We had a frost in early October, a light one. Extraordinarily early,
Amazing.
yeah.
Very early.
So I think I probably would. They're quite easy from seed, aren't they?
Yeah.
But it's so nice when they get to that size, and next year
I
we just
love
go for it. So
Yeah.
maybe, fleece, a layer of fleece
Just-
is 2
just-
degrees of frost,
And would you
isn't
put
it?
them just around the base, or would you just
No,
cover
I'd
the
do
whole thing?
lot.
Whole lot?
And I might put 2 layers. I
Yeah.
look at I always use that weather forecasting app and see what's coming, and then often
And then just do
last thing I'm out chucking. Sometimes I just put sort of puffer jackets and
Yeah.
things over at the
Anything.
last
Yeah.
minute, and it's
Yeah.
amazing what difference
Yeah.
it makes.
Yeah.
And
And I
they
think
used to
we
throw-
really want those ones to survive next year, because as you say, there's nothing like them when they really
They're wonderful.
they go
yeah.
for it, you
yeah.
know.
You could string up some sort of fleecy tent over the top,
Yeah.
or something.
I
Couldn't you,
think it
really?
would be worth it. Yeah.
And then you put in a swimming pool. I mean, that's
Yeah, well, we did.
wonderful indulgence.
It
isn't
is a huge indulgence.
Well, it makes
But
you-
it has really earned its status of indulgence, because all the kids have used it, learnt to swim in it, and our grandchildren use it, and friends use it.
Yeah, I
It's
think it's
been
fabulous,
great.
and it's so healthy, isn't it? They're getting more and more research about swimming and how
Yeah,
it changes
yeah.
your blood vessels and things like that.
Yeah.
What I love is the way you set it into this room, and you've got these 3 buildings, which I thought you'd got from some performance. I imagine they're in Hamlet or something, but you got them.
I got them at Chelsea, and I cannot remember the name, unfortunately, of the designer,
Yeah.
or whether that designer is still designing. I have no idea. But it was a very long time ago, as you can see from the condition they're in.
And you've put the painting on the walls.
Oh yeah, all the stuff inside.
there,
Yeah,
yeah,
a sort of little Moroccan theme.
Touches, yes.
But yeah.
And
no, we
what
love
I've
it.
never seen before is a colonnade of ivy.
Yeah, that
With-
is.
Very clever, isn't it?
It's just evolved so slow. Well, as you can imagine, so slowly to get the. There was a time when a couple of the arches nearly reached the ground, and then suddenly, after about 10 years, I was aware that God, they're finished, they're done, and I'll clip it again early next year.
So you do it once a year, you clip it?
No, it needs more than that.
More than that, is it?
Yeah.
A couple of times?
Couple of times,
Yeah.
twice a year.
Twice a year. And so that's all coming from next door.
It's
and
all
so you've
we
been pulling them
depend-
down.
Yeah, it's just been growing over. It would just be one solid mass
Yeah.
if we hadn't shaped it.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
superb, isn't
The
it?
other thing
Really
it does,
nice.
but you really get a lot of, are wasps, which presumably love that sort of dense ivy growth, I imagine. But in September we get.
But there's also a bee that is specific to ivy.
Oh well, maybe.
And
Maybe.
it's very good for bees. I mean, we've got honeybees and they come out and love it. But there's also a special ivy bee, I think I'm right in saying, which loves it too. It's
Oh right.
It's a
let's
really
hope it
good plant. Yeah, it's a lovely
maybe.
plant.
Yeah.
And then over there,
Yeah.
tell us about the little bit at the end and
Well-
the lawn between.
Yeah. Well, the lawn between is just a lawn where we play a sort of miniaturized version of Boole with
Yes.
family and come down in the evening. And this garden is Grace's garden, it's known as, which our daughter Grace Ward, who was stillborn,
Yes.
and was our 5th. And I always say to Connie, who is officially our fifth, that she's the sixth. But Grace died, and so we dedicated this garden to her. And the plaque there at the end is for and to her.
It's a lovely idea, isn't it, to create a memorial garden for someone like that?
Yeah.
And what inspired you to do that? It's not...
Well, because we both loved gardening,
Yeah.
and we both loved her.
Yes.
And so that it seemed a completely natural, organic thing to do, to make a garden for her. And also because it exists. And so she exists through it and as a memory.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? It keeps them alive
Yeah.
in a very living way,
Yeah.
in a way that you can enjoy them.
Yeah. And obviously, every time I go in there, I'm aware of it having happened. And you know, and it does keep her alive in that sense.
Did you find that difficult initially when you created it, to be reminded of it? Because obviously it's a hugely traumatic...
No, because it's hugely traumatic, but I think both Julia and I are very open about it and think it's a subject that should be talked about more. It's
Yes.
very hidden. There's almost historically a stigma to it, which is so unfair, you know, that people who experience it feel they don't want to talk and that nobody wants to hear about it. And it's so much more common than people imagine.
You think more so than when people die when they're not, you know, later on in life? You think it's more difficult?
More difficult to
For
talk about.
people to talk,
Yes,
yeah.
I
Do you think
think
it's
in
more
a
of a
way it is.
stigma?
It is
Why?
because it's associated with optimism and hope, the process of birth. And so in a sense, you're
see.
giving birth,
Yeah.
without getting morbid, you're giving birth to death. And that paradox is very painful and private.
Yeah.
And I think the more people talk about it, the more mothers, fathers, parents who suffer it will find some sort of catharsis and hope.
Yeah.
But
Yes. No, I think it's very encouraging, and it's a really good thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely.
and
that.
research is paying off gradually, very slowly, but they are beginning to bring the numbers down as they discover different reasons for it.
And this is the charity that you're heavily
That
involved
charity
with.
and other charities,
Yes.
but that's the one.
And the charity is called
It's
again?
called SANS, which
SANS.
is the Stillbirth and Neonatal
Natal.
Death Society.
Right.
Yeah.
That is good to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So looking back, it looks lovely. You can hardly see the house, can you? What I think is, I mean, it is a large garden, isn't it, for London?
For
It's
London,
a
it is.
a very large garden. But I love the way that you divided it up into different areas. You've got a very different feel. I can see your interest in the arts and painting in this, because
Yeah.
you have actually, you know, you've really thought about it. You've been very disciplined in the different areas and how they link together.
Yeah.
And you've got very different uses. And it is like you've done a painting, isn't it?
Well,
But with plants.
Yeah, hopefully. That's certainly what I enjoy, the idea of well, I mean, you've got an example here of this in the autumn.
Yes.
The tone of the
Japanese maple.
boards alongside this
Yeah.
autumn Acer, yeah.
And you never come up here in the evening when you're practicing your lines and stand up there and run
orate.
through them, do you? Or
Well,
not? Do you practice outside?
I certainly come down here and go through my lines, but usually in the morning because it's east facing and the
Yes.
sun's coming down on it.
Yeah.
And actually this is quite a sun prohibitive, wonderful though it is to have such established trees here. This takes out the light at about 3 o'clock, so I have to get these pollarded every few years.
Yeah.
Otherwise we'd lose all our light.
Yeah.
in the late
These
afternoon.
London plains are amazing, aren't they?
Yeah.
They were suffering. Are they still suffering? From a condition, didn't they? And they used to turn slightly brown. I'm just trying to
Yeah.
remember the name of it. Anthracnose, isn't it?
That's-
Anthracnose
that-
plains.
Right.
And I remember when I worked in London, in Hammersmith, there was a whole row of them, and you'd see them turn slightly brown in early summer, and then they would grow out of it, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
But do these get that?
These ones have never really suffered in that way, no.
Oh, right. They are
No.
wonderful trees.
Yeah.
I never can understand why London plains are in London, and you see a few in Cambridge and
Yeah.
other cities,
I
but
don't
they
know.
seem to be very London-centric.
Yeah, I mean, is it a... No, I can't think of any
They
reason.
tolerate pollution, they tolerate everything, don't they? And
Well,
they
I
have
think that's
magnificent
that's it,
trees.
really,
That's why
isn't it?
they're so
And
popular.
the sycamores, I suppose, is the same reason, isn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, I
They
remember
tolerate
during
everything.
that great hurricane or non-hurricane, I can remember Julia and I and Alice, who was only 2, our eldest, with her in bed, and the sycamores were bent over double, but none of them
Really?
fell.
Gosh.
None of them went over, you
Yeah.
know.
Flexible.
Others
Yeah.
did, but...
I think
and
that's
then
all.
these are extraordinary. I mean, why the council planted these huge maples in the road, and you know the whole pavements are sort of bowed and
yeah.
buckling.
Well, you
yeah.
say that, but I think
I think
that's
they're
what makes
beautiful.
London amazing, because there are so many trees.
Yeah.
But the problem is when they're putting all these cables in for, you know,
Yeah.
broadband and this, that, the other, a lot of them are going because they've got to trench through
yeah,
them, and
yeah.
they really suffer. So there's a big campaign to try and keep them. But they are continually, as you say, having to be locked and
yeah.
pollarded and
Yeah.
things to keep them safe.
I mean, they're
and
great
buses
trees.
and lorries coming by.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
going mad.
Yeah, absolutely. But what amazes me about you, I think, is you've got 5 children. You're a playwright, a successful actor. Your wife is an actress, and she was in the final of MasterChef.
Yeah.
And she's a magnificent cook.
Yeah.
How do you do it all?
She's also a therapist now.
Is she?
She went to Birkbeck and took a master's in
Gosh,
therapy. So yeah.
you're busy, aren't you?
So we stay busy.
How do you do it? I don't know. But anyway, you're obviously organised and things. But thank you very much for showing me your garden.
Well,
It's been
thank you
lovely
for
to see you.
been lovely to have you here. Thank you for coming over. It's great.